It goes without saying that many movies will live or die on the strength of their central performances, but the horror genre is a little better equipped to deal with the dodgy acting train, say, than a straight drama. After all, the performances are rarely the primary draw for a slasher flick, and given that low-budget horrors, by their nature, don't tend to attract sterling casts, genre fans can be a rather forgiving bunch where ropey acting is concerned, especially if the kills and filmmaking elsewhere make up for it. But, as inspired by a recent Reddit thread on the subject, sometimes a wonky performance is bad enough that you just can't put it to the back of your mind and it ends up compromising the entire movie. And to make matters worse, most of these actors are playing the protagonist, so there's little escaping the overpowering iffiness what we saw. I'm Sean Ferrick for What Culture Horror, and here are 10 horror movie performances that fell totally flat. Number 10. Alicia Witt, urban legend. Alicia Witt has proven herself to be a plenty talented actor in numerous other projects, but her turn as Natalie Simon, the final girl of urban legend, is a bit of a damp squib. Now, it doesn't help at all that Natalie is a rather uninteresting protagonist, but Witt's performance only makes this worse, enough that you'll likely wish the final girl were the decidedly more memorable likes of Sasha or Reese instead. Witt's whiff of a performance only compounds how unlikable Natalie is, and as such you might even find yourself rooting for killer Brenda to finish her off in the end. If Witt was trying to portray Natalie, who is on probation for causing a car accident which killed Brenda's fiancé, as guilt-stricken and traumatised, she instead made her come off as though she's been chugging sleeping pills. Number 9. Keanu Reeves, Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's a testament to how much of a rich stylistic feast Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula movie is that it can withstand the indignity of Keanu Reeves' shambolic performance as English solicitor Jonathan Harker. We love Reeves as much as anyone else, but there's no being kind about it. His clunker of an English accent makes it tough not to wince or laugh your way through every second of his screen time, made worse for him by sharing so many scenes with crowned acting vets Gary Oldman and Anthony Hopkins. Watching Reeves act in this movie, it feels like he's concentrating so hard on nailing the accent that he's forgetting to emote and respond organically to his co-stars, resulting in his Harker coming off as distractingly stilted. Even beyond all this, though, Reeves was fundamentally miscast. It was just asking too much of the audience in 1992 to buy the star of Bill and Ted and Point Break in this role at this time, even though this wasn't Reeves' first foray into period fare. And over 30 years on, it remains a pure dud of a performance. Number 8. Rooney Mara, A Nightmare on Elm Street, 2010. Rooney Mara, who is great in basically everything, gave a total flatline of a performance as protagonist Nancy Holbrook in 2010's thankless remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Mara may as well have had the paycheck roll written on her forehead, because her checked out, even somnambulant work here makes no attempt to mask her disinterest. Tellingly, shortly after the film's release, Mara freely admitted that she attempted to self-sabotage her audition for the part because she didn't actually want to star in it, but accidentally won the role anyway. And so it's easy to appreciate why Mara basically mailed in her performance from another continent, but her lack of commitment also made an already uninspired remake even less interesting. When you add to this the unavoidable comparisons between Mara and Heather Langenkamp's vastly superior iconic turn as the original Nancy, it's just a total miss of her performance. Thankfully for Mara, the Elm Street remake quickly faded into obscurity like a half-forgotten dream, and few likely remember she was even in it. Number 7. Dale Midkiff, Pet Sematary, 1989. 1989's original Pet Sematary adaptation isn't a great movie, despite a fantastically show-stealing performance by Fred Gwynne as Judd Crandall, and perhaps the single worst thing about it? Dale Midkiff's utterly soporific turn as tragic protagonist Louis Creed. The role of Louis requires an actor who can dig deep into some extremely rough emotional territory given the grief his character experiences, but Midkiff just doesn't have a fraction of the range to do it justice. There's stoic and then there's whatever this is. Despite suffering through the loss of both his son and wife and then using the Pet Sematary to resurrect them, the guy's facial expression barely ever changes, ensuring that Lewis feels more like a mere thin sketch of a human being. You'd think what he'd gone through were mere minor inconveniences rather than any husband and father's worst nightmare. Needless to say, the casting of the great Jason Clarke as Lewis in 2019's so-so remake was a major upgrade. Number 6. Bianca Kajlik, Halloween Resurrection. Hands up if you can name Halloween Resurrection's final girl, let alone the actress who played her. That dubious honour goes to Bianca Kadlik's Sarah Moyer, a student at Haddonfield University who ends up on Michael Myers' bad side after spending the night in his abandoned family home as part of a live internet horror show. Sarah is as bland as final girls get, fading into the background with her near non-existent personality, entirely unaided by Bianca's flat performance in the role. It also doesn't help that she stood next to the far more memorable male lead of Freddy Harris, played by a kung fu enthusiastic Busta Rhymes, and while everyone remembers Busta Rhymes busting out his karate moves on Michael, no one can say a damn thing about what Sarah gets up to. Even accepting how wretched Resurrection's script is from start to finish, Kadlik simply blends into the background like a cardboard cutout awkwardly shoved in a corner. Number 5. Stephen Lack, Scanners. David Cronenberg's Scanners is undeniably best remembered for that all-timer head explosion scene and Michael Ironside's deliciously villainous performance as a rogue scanner, Daryl Ravok. But you know who nobody talks about, let alone as much as has memory of? Stephen Lack and his snoozy turn as protagonist Cameron Vale. The ironically monikered actor gives a performance almost entirely bereft of presence, and while a certain degree of sparseness makes sense for his embattled character, Lack ultimately goes overboard by, well, actually doing nothing at all. Lack renders Vale in only monotonous terms, such that it's a major miracle that Cronenberg's effervescent filmmaking is able to counterbalance it enough to keep Scanners compelling. Though the camera loves Lack's face during intense close-ups, anytime he's called to deliver convincing dialogue, he categorically fails the sniff test. Even if Cronenberg cast Lack with the absolute intention of having him play the part this way, it's a net negative for the movie all over. Number 4. Kelly Rowland, Freddy vs. Jason. It's not uncommon for musicians to try breaking into acting to then fall flat on their face in their first major effort, and that's uniquely true of Destiny's Child member Kelly Rowland in Freddy vs. Jason. Rowland plays Kia, one of the friends of protagonist Laurie, and even though Kia is clearly supposed to be obnoxious to a point, Rowland fails to bring any basic charm or charisma to the part, ensuring she's just an annoying nuisance anytime she's on screen. It doesn't help at all, of course, that Kia famously calls Freddy a certain homophobic slur out of nowhere, which is what most horror fans remember of Rowland's performance in the movie. Nobody's watching a Freddy vs. Jason film for the performances of the doomed meat sacks, but even so, this was blatant stunt casting that just didn't pan out at all. At least Kia got a hell of a brutal death when Jason hit her so hard with his machete, she got yeeted straight into a tree. Number 3. Mark Wahlberg, The Happening. To be fair, nobody gets out of M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening with their dignity intact, least of all Mark Wahlberg, whose performance as, don't laugh, high school science teacher Elliot Moore netted him a Worst Actor Razzie nomination. Now, Wahlberg has certainly proven himself to be a fine actor when cast appropriately, but even if you can get on board with him playing a teacher, the man seems completely lost amid Shyamalan's madcap sci-fi horror film. The uneven, basically schizophrenic tone of his performance, fleeting between straight-faced and self-aware, suggests he didn't quite realise if he'd signed on for a serious thriller or pure camp. It doesn't help that Wahlberg has zero romantic chemistry with screen spouse Zooey Deschanel, and in fact you might argue that he has more chemistry with that plastic plant. Wahlberg has openly called The Happening a really bad movie, but was at least good-humoured about his absurd miscasting. You can't blame me for not wanting to try and play a science teacher, at least I wasn't playing a cop or a crook. Number 2. Melissa Barrera, Scream 2022. 2022's fifth Scream film mounted the thankless task of introducing a younger new protagonist to take up the mantle from original heroine Sidney Prescott, who only appears in the sequel in a mere supporting capacity. The new lead turned out to be, spoilers, Billy Loomis's daughter, Sam Carpenter, played by Barrera. And some fans had their knives out for Sam already through the sheer virtue of being Sid's replacement. In her debut, Barrera seemed ill at ease in the role, though thankfully seemed far more comfortable by the time she filmed Scream 6. In fairness, Barrera wasn't exactly given the series' strongest writing on her first time up to bat, but her portrayal made it tough for audiences to get behind her character. Clearly, she took the vocal feedback on board though, as she basically crushed it in the next movie, which itself included scenes aimed at those who were less than professional in their criticisms. Barrera's dismissal from Scream 7 due to her vocal support of Palestine seems to have put any future plans for Sam Carpenter's return on hold. Jenna Ortega has also exited the project, as has initial director Christopher Landon. It remains to be seen what the returning Neve Campbell and Kevin Williamson can do to try and save this troubled series. Number 1. Chris Rock, Spiral. When it was announced that the Saw franchise was getting a soft reboot of sorts, as spearheaded by Chris Rock, there was certainly intrigue to see what Rock, best known for his comedy work, would bring to the horror series. The answer? Not a lot. In addition to Rock pitching the idea for Spiral, which centres around a jigsaw killer copycat, he stars in the film as protagonist detective Zeke Banks. And while Rock is certainly a competent actor, he was rock solid in Fargo the year prior, the mode of his performance just felt so off for the tone of a Saw movie. Rock's loud, initially comically infused performance made him stick out like a sore thumb compared to both the rest of the cast and everything going on around him. Granted, Spiral's lackluster script did him no favours at all, but Rock was clearly egregiously miscast in the role, and many fans simply struggled to take him seriously, as proved especially problematic for the movie's bleaker later sections.